Well, Ben, it's good to have you back on the Urbanomics show. It's been quite some time. Been quite some time since I've recorded any episodes.
Yeah.
But you've been encouraging me to get back on here, and I'm happy to have my son Benjamin join me for the continuation of this podcast. So it's between Christmas and New Year, that in between space when we've celebrated big, but we're not quite done celebrating.
Right.
But the awesome part is we've got the whole family home for a couple days. Benjamin is here from Vanderbilt University, freshman year. How's it feel?
It's good. Well, good to be back.
Yeah.
I think I was on the first ever Urbanomish podcast episode, if I remember, or one of the first, first three. So it's fun. But yeah, it's really good to be back home. I feel like I have two homes, kind of, because, we lived in Nashville, obviously, and then staying there for college, I have all my people, and then family up here in a very different area that I love. Brings different aspects to life, but it's been really good to be just relaxing here.
How is it to be a freshman at one of the elite universities in this country?
It's challenging to start off, but I mean, like the first semester, I'm only one semester in, so it definitely took extra work to get adjusted to that, because I had to teach myself how to study, how to manage my time, while still prioritizing the social aspect of school that doesn't necessarily come as easy to me. But it's been very eye-opening too, and everything that I imagined it would be and more, I think. Just the people that I meet and the level, like I obviously heard about the level of intelligence and experience in, by the professors, but I don't think I didn't really understand what that looked like until I was sitting there and kind of taking in some of that. So it's been pretty awesome.
First couple of weeks were pretty rough, you said. Tell me about the time that you really questioned your decision and really were kind of at the wall.
Yeah, well, to pick one time would be tough.
Oh, sorry about that. Pouring coffee.
I think most of my thinking happened out on the front porch of my dorm. Like we've talked about how I still do sit on the front porch of my dorm on the rocking chairs out there. It was kind of one way for me to get a little bit of alone time away from my dorm, and especially if it was late at night doing homework and I have some time to think. And I thought a lot I made a hard decision going into that first semester. Well, I guess it would have been earlier in the year. I made the decision to go to Vanderbilt over Ole Miss, which was the plan for probably the better part of a year leading up to my acceptance into Vanderbilt. My girlfriend of now 5 years is a freshman at Ole Miss, and we had everything planned out. Then later in the year, I got my acceptance to Vanderbilt, and I was like, I got two things pulling on my heartstrings, So I made that decision, and the first few weeks I was dealing with that, while also dealing with being alone from family for the first time, 8 hours away, not really having any established friendships yet at school. So yeah, there were definitely a lot of hours I spent sitting out there, sometimes 2-3 o'clock in the morning. Just, I thought I sometimes would cry, things that I've never really cried all that much, but I don't know. I listened to music in a different way in those few weeks, it was just a very new experience. So
You've always been an old soul, and so it doesn't surprise me that you were sitting on the rocking chair on the porch of your dorm getting adjusted. For those who don't know, the summer before Ben went to college, our family moved from Franklin, Tennessee, which is just south of Nashville. We moved back to my hometown, which is Millersburg, Sugar Creek, Ohio. And we moved into a home that I had helped my dad build when I was a teenager. So now we live here with our family. The oldest kids have moved out, two of the oldest, Benjamin being one of those. And a couple of weeks after we moved to Ohio, we moved him back down to Nashville to move him into Vanderbilt. So you're the first one in our family that's moving out to go to college. That was a new experience for us. And it's been good to see you struggle and rise to the challenge. I feel like I had never really seen you challenged to the extent that you were the first couple of weeks. When I would FaceTime you, I could see in your face that you were getting stretched like crazy, that you were up against the wall in some ways, and you were not sure how you were going to get through that, but you did. So tell me, after the first couple of weeks, you got into some extracurricular activities. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so kind of, I think it was a pretty recent development going into my freshman year that I was like, I kind of want to pursue maybe like a pre-law kind of field. Not really, I'm still working out the details of that, what I want to major in. Right now I'm on track for economics and history majors, and maybe thinking about law school. So with that in mind, I just on a whim kind of auditioned for a mock trial, the Vanderbilt mock trial team, which for those of you that don't know what that is, we go and like dress up like we're lawyers kind of and go to a courthouse and do the whole thing, act it out. So it's fun, and it takes a lot of work, more than I expected at first, which is something else that, one of those things that I had to deal with in that moment. But yeah, so I got into that. I auditioned and I didn't think I was even going to get in, but it happened. So, and then I was also struggling a lot with like, do I join Greek life? Because that's the thing, it's an SEC school. That's what everyone does in SEC schools, is join Greek life. And I was like, I don't know if those values really align with mine, but I ended up talking to a lot of guys that encouraged me to try it out, because it's a lot harder to join after a year or so. So I've been kind of diving into that and realizing that I don't think, at least at Vanderbilt or at the fraternity that I've been interacting with, I don't think it's what I guess society would paint it to be as much. And a lot of that could just be the culture there at the school. So I can't really speak for other schools, but that's been great too, because it automatically gives me the kind of brotherhood that I don't, I'm not playing a sport anymore. I played football in high school. That was something I was missing, my first few weeks of college, having that brotherhood. So that has been another healthy development for me. So
awesome.
Yeah.
You've always kept your circle pretty small. You've been dating the same girl for 5 years. You met in 8th grade. Now you're a freshman in college. She's off at Ole Miss, and you've had a small circle of friends, but it feels like you've been able to expand that circle in college to find people that you connect with at kind of a values alignment level. Like you mentioned. Tell me about your values and the way that you think about that, and the way that you articulate that to yourself, and how you evaluate things through that lens.
Well, that was one of the big questions that I had to face going into, once I was moved out, once you all left. I'm sitting there alone, a completely blank slate. Nobody knows who I was. So I just kind of was confronted with that. Like, what do I value? And, who am I? Because I kind of had control of that from that point forward. So I think it just, for me, a lot of it comes down to, I've talked to a lot of friends about this idea of finding kind of how I balance values through prayer and reflection. Even a lot of my friends that aren't necessarily religious, we've had conversations about the power of thinking about, sitting there at the end of your day and being like, what do I really value? Because there's a lot of people, and especially kids, going into new environments at school, and we're all faced with this. Like, you just kind of are. It's tempting just to kind of wonder and just go as life guides you a little bit without having to make hard decisions and have a value hierarchy. But I found that some kind of prayer, some kind of reflection is like, does this point me in the direction of what's good, even if it's hard, and is it true? Because those things, I think, are intertwined. You talked a lot about, I've heard you say, what's true, good, and beautiful. That's kind of, a lot of that is wrapped up in this kind of God idea. Mm-hmm. So even as I'm sitting there, like, thinking about, like, who am I? What do I value? Who is God? Things like these crazy questions. I can think about, what is in my life, what is true and what is good and what is beautiful. Mm-hmm. And are the things that I'm doing aligning with that or pointing me towards that? And I think that kind of helped me develop a little bit of a sense of what I value.
Mm-hmm. We live in a culture that would tell you that what you should value is your immediate, impulsive, hedonic pleasure and the realization of that, the pursuit of that, and the gratification of that in this moment. If it feels good or if I want it, it's really that my immediate desires in this moment are what drives so much of what the wider culture lifts up and celebrates and amplifies. So how do you find it being in a secular college environment with a lot of other young people, when you have this hierarchy of values that you're seeking to live out and live by? Do you find that rubs up against the kind of immediate hedonic impulse and pleasure gratification thing in the wider culture, or do you find that you have aligned with other kids that are similarly oriented? How do you experience that?
I've found that there's a surprising amount of kids that are not tempted by those kind of. I know it's a society. It's kind of what drives society, that immediate need for pleasure now, for what helps me right now. But talking to a lot of people, even if they're not religious, it feels like they have something that they're aiming towards. And when they can, say that and make that explicit, a lot of times it's not going to be something harmful, right?
Right.
If I ask you, like, what you're aiming for, and you can actually say what you're aiming for.
Very few people would say,
admit that
I'm aiming at the destruction of everything, right, or something, right?
Right. I think so. I think I've been pleasantly surprised by that, even if not everyone, maybe I'm a little bit glad that not everyone walks around as, like, very pious. I don't know. It's been fun to run into unique people. But going into college, I was warned. It was like a lot of people in my life warned me, be careful. Don't let the culture change you. Don't let that. There's just this. There's a sense. A lot of people have the sense that these elite institutions maybe twist the minds of the intellectual youth, and I think there's a case to be made for that. But what I've seen so far is that these kids are driven and they're intelligent enough to articulate what they're driven towards.
Mm-hmm. It looks, just from my short experience with Vanderbilt, since you've been there, it seems to me like it falls kind of at this juncture between, it's one of the elite universities, but it doesn't seem to have fallen prey to quite the level of identity politics and all of that you hear coming out of the Harvard and Yale and some of the other like top-notch universities. And I wonder, because we've talked about that since you've been there. What are you seeing? Are you seeing any of those kinds of ideas? And I'm sure you see some of that, but it sounds like it's kind of balanced by some other things. What do you think that is? Well, you mentioned people being motivated to strive for something higher,
Yeah.
something better.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely see what's going on in some of those Ivy institutions. I don't know if you saw the development in the Harvard president's plagiarism scandal, but there definitely is corruption at that level. I think something that really holds Vanderbilt down is the culture, the Southern culture, a little bit, which, the Southern culture no doubt has its flaws. But one of those flaws is not radical progressive ideology.
Right.
So it's kind of two conflicting forces that kind of meet in a happy medium. They're kind of balancing each other out.
It feels like it's maintained more of what a university should be.
Yeah. I mean, I've been really shocked by the amount of encouragement towards free speech. I think we took a tour at Vanderbilt early on in my college search process, and I was walking by and I saw some flags or some signs or posters, and I was like, that's pretty extreme, whether it was one way or the other. But now that I'm actually there, it feels like there's a pretty healthy dialogue. And there's groups that, push for what they want. And there's other groups that are on the opposite end of whether it's cultural, political, religious spectrum, that push for what they want without really butting heads. So I haven't sensed like any kind of violent tension or kind of aggression. But, like our chancellor does a great job of making it really a priority that anyone should be able to come on campus and say what they want to say without, being threatened.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we've kind of covered the college journey a little bit. Tell me a little bit about your relationship that you've been in with your girlfriend for 5 years. How has that been to be apart from each other now? And how do you think about that? And what's that been like?
Well, I think the most obvious developments is we've been forced to communicate more intentionally. We went from seeing each other every day at school. We went to the same middle school and the same high school. So we went from seeing each other every day to, once every 3 weeks, maybe once a month. So that just forces you to, especially because we've acknowledged that we're in it for the long run, and we've already poured 5 years of our lives into each other. So like we just have to communicate more. Mm-hmm. But I think it's been really healthy, as hard as it's been. On my, obviously it would be nice to be closer. But doing things like driving down there, it's a 4-hour drive, not that bad. Just driving down there for a weekend, going to a football game with friends, making memories like that just kind of makes them more special, I think. And also I'm kind of hoping that it can make the college experience maybe go a little bit faster, because I have something that I'm looking forward to. I don't know if that's going to slow down time or speed it up, but now I have to wait to graduate to get married. So,
Well, I want to encourage you to don't speed it up, because you are living the dream in so many ways. You get to go to a wonderful university in a city that is just ascendant in almost every way. Nashville is just, its star is rising. And you're getting to experience, I think, what what I kind of hoped that I could experience when I was your age, but it wasn't in the cards for me to go to college and all of that. So I'm really happy that you get to do that. And, you know, you've been dating this wonderful girl for 5 years. Her family is awesome. They love you well. They take great care of you, and they provide, her dad provides another outlet for some of your dreams to come true in terms of being able to drive awesome cars and go to awesome restaurants and eat great food and kind of live a really wonderful life when you're with them. So tell me about some of the cars and some of the experiences you've had with that. You know, I'm a car guy.
Yeah. So my girlfriend's dad, Jeremy Sweeney, shameless plug, has awesome cars. And well, her family, I think, has played a huge part in my just kind of getting comfortable in Nashville, because I can drive down to Franklin at 30-minute drive. Well, it's probably more like an hour now, but 30-mile drive. And I can get there, have a good home-cooked dinner, and like they're super generous and welcoming. And, you know, I think they miss Amelia. And so, you know, me being around, and it's just a good time, you know, and definitely provide some comfort. And like you said, some cool cars. So he's got a couple Porsches. I know your dream car, the 911 Turbo. He has one of those. So that's been, you know, just being able to go out on a Saturday after maybe a hard exam that week or something, and then just have to, you know, I can just forget about some of the stress that I've been under that week and be with family, you know, drive cars, hang out with her little brother and her dad. And sometimes she's around too, you know, and her mom. It has really been wonderful to have them that close.
Yeah. I thought the other day when I saw the picture of you driving the GT3 RS to a car show, and you were rallying up there with the other guys, with Jeremy driving
Jeremy was in his NSX, and his Acura NSX, and Truett was in the 993. So we were kind of going, passing each other, going back and forth, getting cool pictures of each other. Things like that. It was really cool.
I saw those pictures. I thought that kid is kind of living the dream right there.
Yeah, that's true.
Pretty cool. So let's shift to a little bit more serious topics. We talked about some of the challenges you faced when you got into college. Tell me, if you allow yourself to dream about the next 5 to 10 years, and you imagine that the best of you emerges over that time frame, and that things go well for you, and that you follow your path with truth and courage and all of that, where do you picture yourself, or tell me what you think about when you think about yourself in 5 to 10 years from now?
Well, I think in 10 years, I would love to have started a family. Mm-hmm. Like that to me is just, I think, my biggest life goal, because it goes back to when I think about things that I value or that fulfill me. It's like being with family and those connections. So in 10 years, I would love to have started a family. Mm-hmm. In the next 5, that 5 to 10 year range, it feels a little bit fluid right now. But I kind of could dream. I would dream about getting married and getting a job at maybe a bank or a real estate firm, and just working really hard for 2 or 3 years. We could have maybe in a tiny house or a tiny, apartment in New York City, mm-hmm. or, I don't know, Chicago or Nashville.
Yeah.
But just kind of 3 to 4 years of just really hard work to set up the next 5 years. Mm-hmm. I've also thought about law school. So I don't think I would go to law school straight out of undergrad, because I'm already kind of getting tired of the school. I mean, I love school, but I'd know that after these 4 years, I'm going to want to take a break.
Yeah. Well, it seems to me when I talk to you about this stuff that the idea of getting married and starting a family is of greater importance to you than going to graduate school.
Yeah.
Right after
College.
undergraduate. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I love that. I mean, I want you to follow your path, and if it includes postgraduate education, fantastic. That would be awesome too. But you know that we value family and celebrate marriage and having kids and all of that. So we're looking forward to.
I know that I would rather, have an unsuccessful career and have a growing and happy family than the opposite. So that's how I kind of see that.
There's that hierarchy of values coming out again.
Yeah.
Love that. So let's talk a little bit about flourishing, about practices and mindsets and habits that we can build. It's one of the things that I'm passionate about. And obviously we can talk about that in our physical health and wellness, mental and emotional health, spiritual health, and relational health. Tell me, let's just go through that a little bit. What are you doing right now to take care of your body physically, and what are your habits and routines around that? I know college can be a tough. You've lost some weight since you've gone to college. I know a lot of freshmen gain some weight when they go to college, but it's been the opposite for you, despite the unlimited Vanderbilt food plan, which is prodigiously
I'd have some
wonderful and tasty.
I'd have some things to say about the Vanderbilt meal plan system. I'm going to keep it. I'm going to just not say anything. It's good for what it is. Anyway, in college, I think right before college, this past summer after my senior year, I knew that I wanted to lose some weight from football. I had just gotten off that recovery from breaking my leg playing football. And I was like, I just need to get more active, lose a little bit of this weight, kind of chisel down a little bit. So diet wise, I have tried to I think the biggest thing has just been limiting portion sizes. I don't know. When I was putting on weight for football, I got into a bad habit of just eating and eating and eating and eating and eating until I was passed out on the couch. So limiting that, and then also just trying to be intentional about moving some way, whether it's lifting weights or I got into running. And then going into college, I started taking a lot more steps every day, 10, 15, 20,000 steps a day. And, I was used to just coming in and mom having lunch or dinner ready, but now I have to walk to a dining hall and
keep talking. I'm going to go plug in the camera so we don't lose that.
Okay. Yeah. So I was now responsible for my own food. So I think that's how I lost a lot of weight really quickly. It probably was 10 pounds in the first 2 weeks or something like that. And that's probably part of the reason that you saw I had looked really kind of sunken in, really thin.
Yeah, you look kind of gaunt when I FaceTimed you the first time.
Yeah.
I was like, whoa, is this kid okay?
Yeah. But maybe that was a little extreme. I think I've balanced it out now where I've been eating a good amount, but it's more maybe protein based, less sugars, and still trying to move, running. I think one of my goals for the next year, for 2024, is to get back into weightlifting, because I just feel like I feel better when I move weights. But yeah, I think running has been big. It's fun to take a run around Nashville. I can run 1.5 miles in one direction and see a bunch of new sites or maybe cool coffee shops or anything like that. So that's been really fun to kind of play with that a little bit.
What about your mental and emotional health? How would you say, what are some things you do to keep that where you want it?
It's like I said earlier, a big one is prayer or reflection. Looking back on my day. Like I don't necessarily have like a set prayer schedule where it's like every morning I pray, and before every meal I pray, or before before I get to bed I pray. I've tried to make it more of a maybe constant thing throughout the day. I feel it's really important to just reflect, or to think about my thoughts, right? Because you have thoughts. I think I want to say that Jordan Peterson had a piece on this. Like you have flashes, and these thoughts that flash into your brain, instinctive kind of thoughts, and then thinking about those is what changes you, or sharpens your mind, or grounds your mental. So that reflection has been really big for me. Trying to have a schedule where I read the Bible, start my day with that, even if it's a couple verses. It keeps me from sleeping in also, so that's good too. And then, I think just reading, being aware of how much time I'm like on my phone, being active about limiting that, and surrounding myself with good, positively oriented people, because I can have a tendency to not be as optimistic or positive. So a lot of my really good friends right now are really bright and happy and optimistic people. So that's another thing. Yeah.
So you mentioned the Bible. What's a verse or a passage that you've been thinking about recently, or that's stood out to you, or that means something to you right now?
I actually wrote one down, so I'm gonna pull it up.
Yeah.
Here. It's Philippians 3:10 through 14, and another thing I didn't mention that's been good for my mental health is I'm still involved in a Bible kind of youth men's ministry group down in Franklin. So I drive down to Franklin every Tuesday and help co-lead a group of like a men's leadership development based on Christian values. And so the other week I led on this passage. So just bear with me while I read this real quick. This is, for context, this is Paul writing to the church at Philippi. Probably the greatest transformation of all time. So shout out Paul. He said in verse 10, I want to know Christ and experience the mighty power that raised him from the dead. I want to suffer with him, sharing in his death, so that one way or another I will experience the resurrection from the dead. I don't mean to say that I've already achieved these things or that I have already reached perfection, but I press on to possess that perfection for which Christ Jesus first possessed me. No, dear brothers and sisters, I have not achieved it, but I focus on this one thing, forgetting the past and looking forward to what lies ahead. I press on to reach the end of the race and receive the heavenly prize for which God, through Christ Jesus, is calling us. That verse stood out to me so much because it hits two things that have been like challenging me the most with my spiritual journey, I think. It's that getting to know Christ, that experiencing like his suffering, knowing him intimately. That's one aspect that I wrestle with almost every day. And then the other is looking at my spiritual journey as a process that I am every day aiming towards, right? To reach the goal. I haven't achieved it yet, to every day want to bring the Spirit of Christ, bring the kingdom of heaven into my life, and to repent where I'm at every day, so that when I read that, I was like, whoa, that speaks to me where I need it to, I think.
That idea of pressing on kind of reminds me of what we talked about this morning in Hebrews about the endurance of those who have gone on in faith. They endured in the faith, and they kept I forget the language, but it has that same idea of
Mm-hmm.
pressing on. And I think sometimes for me, it's also just this reminder to notice that the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And it can feel sometimes like, well, if things aren't going well, what am I not doing, or what am I not,
Right.
performing correctly? But that is not, when the prophets of Baal were competing against the prophets of God, and they were on the mountain, they were trying to call down fire. They did all these rituals and performances, and it didn't work, But prophet, I forget which one of the prophets it was now, but he prayed, and it happened. The fire came down and consumed the altar, and there was no question about which God was alive. But he didn't perform all this stuff. He didn't, dance around and do these jigs and do these chants and all this stuff. He just prayed. And I think that's a reminder to me to just pray, and not even necessarily pray in saying something, but to your point about meditating and reflecting on and really listening to what God is saying to me. And that's when I notice that the kingdom is at hand, and that I can live into that reality. But it is an ongoing pressing forward, because we're always seeing, we can open our eyes and see other things. We can see, if we're looking for evidence that evil is winning, or that the darkness is growing, or any of that, like, we can find evidence that confirms that. But noticing that the kingdom of heaven is at hand, and that is what is growing around me, that is when, that's when we get to live in that reality. And what more could you want out of life than to live in the present reality of the kingdom of heaven?
Exactly. And I recently, for some reason, I've had a lot of conversations where people mention, I'm just a lukewarm Christian. I'm sure you've probably heard that term before. And I've realized that that's something that I don't want to be at all. To me, it's I have a harder time relating to the lukewarm Christian than I do the atheist. Right? Because
God does too, it turns out.
yeah. Well, yeah, just the idea of saying you believe something but not wanting to look yourself in the mirror enough to say, enough to actually believe.
Yeah, and not wanting to go all in on
Right.
something. It's, I think that is when I read stories like Cain and Abel, where Abel's sacrifice was accepted, but Cain's was not. What I think of is, well, Abel went all in. Like, he went all in on this thing,
Right.
and he poured out his life towards the goal. And Cain kept holding back, like, what if I could get something better over here? What if, if I give that up, then I won't have it for myself. And, it's like that resistance to sacrifice, that resistance to going all in. And you and I know, when we meet people who are all in on their life, it's electric. Like,
even if it's not what we
exactly.
agree with.
It's, even if it's not our thing, it's, man, I can appreciate the fact that guy is all in.
Yeah.
And it's inspiring, and it motivates you, and it's alive, and it's, this kind of consciousness and this possibility is like, he's not holding back. He's all in, and it makes me want to be all in.
Yeah.
But God talks about that idea of, if you're lukewarm, he just wants to, spit you out of his mouth, like lukewarm coffee or whatever.
Right.
So
you gotta be hot or cold.
Yeah.
Don't
Exactly.
be lukewarm. Yeah. So that idea of just the language in this translation is, I press on to reach the end of the race and receive the heavenly prize for which God through Christ Jesus is calling us. The idea of just pressing on, like, that's what I need to read, to not become complacent and lukewarm.
Yeah.
whether it's in my faith or in my life.
Love that. You've challenged me on some things in some of the conversations we've had since you've been home the last couple of weeks. What are some things that you wish that the parents of your peers would know? Or what would you say to the parents of your peers about parenting children at this stage of life? Or at any stage of life, really? What do you see in people's lives that they suffer from that you might have insight to share that could ease that suffering?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. It's been really fascinating in college to be able to talk about people and ask about their relationship with their parents, which people are surprisingly okay to talk about. Because a lot of them are hard stories to hear, and they're, broken in one way or another. I think the theme that I see the most across these stories is a lack of saying what is true, and that becoming kind of it kind of grows into just like a sour resentment. And it's almost hard for people to explain. There's a lot of dads that I've heard about that just don't know how to tell their kid, I love you. I'm really proud of you. If you ever need anything, I'm here for you. And I'm like, that's essential to a healthy relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And something that you've done a great job of, and you and mom as parents have really prioritized, is that being vocal about it, and also being, you have boundaries and you discipline to the appropriate amount, but you've also made it very clear that you would much rather have us confess something to you than just hold it in and maybe you find out some other way.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You're not going to punish us if we confess. Right. Same way with the Lord. He forgives our confessions. But I just don't see that. I don't know if that's a generational thing. But there's definitely a lot of brokenness. I think I see the most brokenness in a parent, a father to child relationship from the people I've talked to.
Do you think that's a kind of symptom of maybe a larger malaise that men in our culture find themselves in, that the culture has become less hospitable to traditionally masculine roles?
It very well could be. I mean, there's less moms are working more now. And dad, I don't know. I don't know. I just know that I've really valued you and mom playing separate roles in our family, and I don't think everyone gets that. Either. I'm not saying that there's necessarily one way to do it or a perfect way to do it, but to have a dad that can't even connect or communicate that, like, he loves you while still having a healthy, boundary set, that seems like it would be really hard to make it somewhere in your life.
It seems in some way almost like a reflection of when you look at movies, TV shows, sitcoms, etc. over the past 30, 40, 50 years. Most of the time, the dads are represented as kind of a rube,
Not very bright.
Yeah, they're poked fun at, and they're the butt of the joke, and they're not very sophisticated. They're not very they're not very involved in their kids' lives, and in some ways, it seems like perhaps some dads just live into that cultural expectation in some senses, or that they fall into that without being aware that they are. And the stories we tell establish some of the patterns that we live in, and if that's the story that keeps getting repeated, it has to have an impact. So just telling your kids that for dads to really be vulnerable with their kids and open their hearts to them and communicate their love for them. And, when I think about love, I think about, I want the highest for you. I want the best for you. My friend Jamie George talks about love is something like the highest in me wants what's best for you. Yeah. And I work towards that end.
And that has to be established for any kind of discipline to be healthy and helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because otherwise a child or a kid is not going to see the reason why. Like, why am I being disciplined? If, for what? Because you don't like me? Because I didn't follow your rules? If you don't establish that love, I'm doing this because I want what's best for you. Yeah. As much as it hurts me to do it. If you don't establish that, then that discipline grows to resentment.
Yeah, and if there's not also an equal amount of self-discipline, where if I'm trying to hold you to a standard that I don't hold myself to, right, then there's also resentment there. Yeah. And you've been able to point out, not that there was a me trying to hold you to a standard, but you have told me when you see that I'm not living up to the standard that I've communicated that I think is the best. And I think that kind of dialogue is critical to establish, where you have an ethic or a framework that you hold up as being the ideal. It's like, this is what we want to live by. This is what we aim at. This is what we strive for. We seek to embody love in our family. We seek to practice grace. We seek to speak the truth. Yeah. All of that. And when one of us falls short and does not hold ourselves to that standard, then the rest of us come around each other and encourage and lift up. But it has to be done in the context of, I'm willing to hold myself to that standard too. And I have to be willing to be vulnerable about where I fall short and to be honest about where I fall short.
And I think that has been lost in a lot of ways with the loss of religion in families. Whether it's Christianity or not, at least you have something that you're aiming towards.
Right. Yeah.
Like, eventually, generational aimlessness, there's going to be, built up pain there. Yeah. Because you don't have something to pass down. You don't have that center that ideal that we're working towards. So it's just generations of resentment build up. It's not that, healthy relationship.
Chris Williams from the Modern Wisdom podcast talks a lot about and he's not coming at it from a religious angle, but he just talks about how the decay of the traditional gender roles and marriage and family roles have led to, well, and not just that decay, but he talks about it in the context of the sexual revolution and the immediate gratification of my hedonic pleasures, and all of that has led to this kind of coming apart of the individual, and the family unit. There's an atomization and a chaotic fracturing that seems to be happening, where the vast majority of people don't get to sit down for a meal with other people and be known. He talked about in some Western countries in Europe where a shocking percentage of people over the age of 65, 70 haven't been called by their first name in years by anyone, because they don't have anyone. They don't know anyone. They're childless, their marriage has failed, or if they have had children, their relationships are broken and they've just come apart. And so they're being cared for by the state at some level, at a very low level, but it's an impersonal kind of thing where there's no intimate connections, and people don't hear their names spoken to them ever. And it's like, just things like that. It's like, man, it's hard to imagine what that does to you.
Yeah.
And so I do think that your generation is starting to see some of the failures of the current cultural story. The current cultural story being the one that says that reaching your individual goals and reaching your individual seeking your individual desires and pleasures as a sole actor, like that's the highest good. Your generation does seem to be seeing that isn't working out all that good.
Well, that's the kind of truth, or the kind of belief that can only last about 1 or 2 generations.
Right.
Before everything becomes very obvious.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you're right. I think kids my age are starting to see that and pick up on that and be like, yo, something's not right. And especially in, these high achieving places, these institutions, of the top, 1% of people that come from I've been so shocked by how many people are in broken families in that their families are so successful.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say Vanderbilt on average comes in at like the average family income is like $500,000-$600,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
That puts you at the highest threshold.
0.001%.
And so the very successful people, a lot of my friends' parents met, at Harvard or something,
mm-hmm.
or, Stanford, whatever it is, these crazy schools, and they're very successful. And then there's just a lot, I have friends that just don't, despite coming from successful families, still have hardships in their relationships. So yeah, it's been very interesting to talk about that and work through those things with my friends.
It's kind of interesting how, like, in some sense, the current state of affairs when it comes to family structure and the rate at which it's coming apart, and the percentage of homes that are fractured in that way, it's almost like it's a privilege of late stage capitalism or late stage Western value. If we were in a survival culture or hunter gatherer foraging culture or something like that, you wouldn't have that, because everybody's concerned primarily with feeding themselves and having kids, and raising food and providing. And there's no, the fact that we have this time to think about my own personal happiness and whether that's, growing or not. And so am I happy with this person, and do I need to let them go and pursue this other person? Like, that kind of fracturing is like, we have the space to do that because of the fact that we have this powerful, we live in this culture that has so much excess.
Yeah, I think it'd be fair to say that this past century is probably the first time in the history of mankind that people have, even the bottom tier of people, have had enough that they can live a life without a meaning, without a purpose.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like you said, there's always been something, whether it's like a need for something, I need to go out and provide for my family.
Right.
There's just so much excess that even the poorest people can afford drugs.
Yeah.
Right. To
cell
numb their mind,
and
right,
cable TV and
right,
all that,
and that becomes like a really, really destructive positive feedback loop.
Yeah,
but yeah, that's a really interesting point. I haven't really thought about that.
Well, and to kind of expand on that, if you think about your peers in America, your age group, something like 1 in 4, isn't in school, has no job, and has no intention of getting one, and consumes thousands of hours of porn and video games, and consumes a lot of weed and alcohol, and lives off of the excesses of the system in some way, and is just numbing themselves. They numb themselves with these different addictions, but you pointed out that they're not pursuing something meaningful in life. Mm-hmm. And the responsibilities of pursuing an education and getting, finding a wife and having children and all of that, like, that provides some of the richest meaning that is available in life.
Yeah. And as far as I can think back in history, there's always been something substantial that comes from the bottom tier of society. whether it's my brain goes immediately to slaves in America. That's like the worst way to live in that time. But they were such a powerful force in the Christian church, how active they were, and that's something that unified them, and still is a major part of that culture. When I look around at like the bottom tier of society in America now, there's nothing.
Yeah.
There is nothing that ties them together.
Yeah.
I mean, like they're standing on the streets of Philadelphia like zombies. It's like, suffering is supposed to bring us together and unify us, but it's hard to see people that suffer without, suffering is supposed to help you grow.
Yeah, and there's just this vacuum.
Yeah.
Wow. It's amazing. Well, this has been a great conversation. We've had a number of good conversations since you've been home. We have started every morning on the side porch with our hoodies on and the Bible and a cup of coffee. Well, a pot of coffee, actually. And you and William and I have had some really good conversations. So thank you for agreeing to sit down again and put this on tape. What else, is there anything else you want to share with our audience before we wrap this up? Anything that you're excited about? Any pet passions or projects that you have, or hobbies that you're engaged in, or books that you're reading, music that you're listening to?
I'll say I'm very excited. I got a couple of books for Christmas. So I took a Russian literature class as my writing seminar. Every freshman had to take a writing seminar. So that one was fascinating to me. I saw the name on the professor when I was looking at classes. I was like, I can't pronounce this name, so I'm going to go with that one. Legit Russian. So that has kind of inspired me to read more Russian literature and start looking at some of the novels. I got War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. I got a couple Dostoevsky books, Crime and Punishment, The Brothers K. I feel like I'm missing one too, but that's like at least a year's worth of reading there, that I'm so excited to take apart and digest that, because those are heavy books, but I've learned like the depth of that came out of that struggle in 1800, the 19th century. 19th century Russia was real.
Oh man.
Like they understood something about the human psyche and captured it, in a way that is hardly anywhere in literature. So, that's kind of my project right now, is reading those. And it's not for school, so like I don't have to write essays about it. I can take notes and write things down that I like, but just reading it, getting to know the characters and seeing those characters in my life. So
well, I know that The Brothers Karamazov is widely considered as one of the best novels ever written, and I'm looking forward to reading that. It's on my shelf. The Gulag Archipelago, it should be on your list too. It is life-changing, and when that book came out, it was one of the final nails in the coffin of the Soviet Union. It changed history. That book did. I have come to read, my brother Nick got me started on some Carl Jung, which I had been putting off a little bit because it sounded too difficult. But it's a little more accessible than what I expected it to be. And I've been struck by Jung's faith. I didn't see that coming. I always pictured Jung, for some reason in my mind, I pictured him as a fierce critic of Christianity, and maybe I was just kind of getting that mixed up with Nietzsche and some of the other. And although Nietzsche's criticism of Christianity didn't come from a place of atheism or being glad that Christianity was struggling. He saw the truth about it and he called it out. But Jung, he had such a rich interior life, and he, from a very young age, wrestled with God in some ways. And it reminds me of some of the things that Dr. Jordan Peterson talks about when he talks about we who wrestle with God,
Yeah.
which is what the word Israel means.
Right. Which you're going to go see.
Which I'm going to go see that tour. That was one of the Christmas gifts that my wife bought me, was a pair of tickets to Peterson's tour, We Who Wrestle with God.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to, it's going to be hard to decide who to take with me. Fill that other ticket.
Yeah. That'll be a good time.
Yeah. And you're not around because you'll be back in school.
Right.
Love to go see that with you. I know William would enjoy that too. I thought about my dad too.
Ooh,
It'd be
yeah.
fun to go see
You
it with
would
my
enjoy
dad. But we'll figure that out. And maybe let's find out when that tour comes through Nashville. I would consider coming down there to see that with you.
That'd be sweet.
So. All right. Well, let's wrap it up. You've got to travel 6.5, 7 hours.
Yeah, I'm going to Pennsylvania.
East, heading to Pennsylvania for the rest of the holiday season. Well, not the rest of it. You'll be there for a couple days and then back here for a week before you.
I know. It already feels too short. Like I'm enjoying my relaxation.
Your freedom.
The holidays.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us today. It's been a pleasure. Of course, Benjamin, like all of my kids, is someone that I am always overjoyed to spend time with and have conversations with. I'm incredibly proud of the young man that he's become, and I'm delighted to see him flourish. And it's been a pleasure to spend time with you here. Thanks, Ben. Love you.
Thanks, Dad. Love you too.